Hello and welcome to the April 27th episode of APHA's 15 on COVID-19 series. I'm Dan Zlot, the Vice President of Education here at APHA. Today we're going to be taking a look at zinc. This has probably been one of the most requested topics that we've gotten in our covided@aphanet.org email address. And so we've been waiting for there to be enough information to talk about. And so we've started to see a little bit of information come out, so we decided this would be a good time to at least address it, help get some information into your hands. So without further delay, let's go ahead and dive right in. As usual, I have nothing to disclose, and here are your learning objectives for today's program. All right, so as soon as we started getting these questions, I've been keeping an eye on the literature, and we finally have enough literature that it was worth doing an episode to kind of review some of the results that are coming up in PubMed. So let's go ahead and start off with zinc. So this is a screenshot of my actual search results taken on Saturday, April 25th. And so did a search for zinc and COVID-19. And as you can see, I got 7 results. So let's go ahead and take a look at each of those 7 results one at a time and see what they tell us. So let's talk about this first study. So this is a study that purports to talk about the potential additive efficacy of chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine and zinc. However, when you actually get into the paper, it's not a clinical trial at all. It's a bunch of hypotheses sort of strung together, and it's extrapolations built on top of hypotheses. So let's kind of go through it just briefly. So the paper itself starts off by discussing some of the properties of zinc, and they talk about the antiviral properties of zinc, in particular against SARS coronavirus, the original SARS coronavirus, hepatitis C virus, H1N1, but then they go on to say that they have no real understanding of the exact mechanism of antiviral properties of zinc in those against those particular viruses. So then next, they talk about a study that looked at hepatitis E virus and how zinc was able to inhibit replication of the hepatitis E virus by inhibiting RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. And then they say that it's been demonstrated that the current coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is also heavily dependent on RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So that's the first part of their argument. And then they go on to talk about what they call metal ionophores, which are compounds that maybe have some synergy when added to metals like zinc. And they suggest that chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine are such ionophores and may potentially, again, have increased effect when combined with zinc. And so they talk about some of the in vitro data in cancer cell lines, in some human cell lines looking at viruses, and there may be some in vitro data there. However, there's no in vitro data specifically talking about SARS-CoV-2. And so then the last little bit where they actually talk about the combination specifically of hydroxychloroquine and zinc for COVID-19, there is no evidence. They don't even suggest that there's any evidence. Instead, they suggest that this is something that's worthy of a clinical trial down the road. So on the whole, this particular study really doesn't tell us a whole lot about whether there's really any increased efficacy of zinc when combined with hydroxychloroquine. So on the whole, as I said, it's really just a string of hypotheses with some extrapolations built on and then some further hypotheses added on top of that. So it really doesn't tell us much at all about whether there's any utility or any efficacy of zinc against COVID-19 with or without hydroxychloroquine. So that's the first one. Now let's go ahead and move on to the second study. So this study is a systematic review of ways to enhance immunity generally, and they talk about a number of different vitamin supplements, selenium, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin E, as well as a number of trace elements, which does include zinc, copper, magnesium, selenium, etc. And so when you actually get into the details of what they found, there's really no evidence specifically looking at zinc for the use of viral pneumonias at all. They talk very generally about the effects of zinc on immunity, and they talk about how zinc supplementation in certain patient populations. So this would be, in one instance, a pediatric population who had pneumonia. Unknown cause, and how that shifted the cytokine response pattern from a Th1 pattern to more of a Th2. Th2, again, helper T cells, different subsets of helper T cells. And so, but really didn't go into many specifics there. Also, no significant clinical outcomes there. And then another group looked at zinc in bone marrow transplant patients and whether that affected the ability to produce certain types of T cells within the bone marrow transplant population. Again, very far removed from the COVID-19 population that we're interested in. And so, and they don't even really come to a good conclusion about whether or not zinc improves immune responses or doesn't improve immune responses. And even if they did, keep in mind with what we know about COVID-19, some of the severe complications come from an overly potent immune response. So there seems to be a fine line between boosting an immune response. We want an immune response to help our systems get rid of the COVID-19 virus. At the same time, if we provoke too strong of an immune response, we potentially get into some of the severe complications of COVID-19 disease, lung damage, lung failure, multi-system organ failure, etc. So a lot of unknowns there, and especially given the far disconnect between the patient populations that are discussed in this paper and the COVID-19 population. So again, this is really not helpful for us in terms of identifying whether or not zinc has any efficacy in COVID-19. So now let's go ahead and move on to the third paper. So this is a paper that is looking at what we call in silico. So it's doing computer modeling of what we know about COVID-19 proteins, binding sites, the receptor site that it uses to gain entry into human cells, etc., in a way to identify small molecules that may be of potential use for treating COVID-19. So it's basically a way to do computer screening of all these things before we actually sit down and put it in a lab and start testing things on cell lines, et cetera, to see if there's any effect. It kind of helps us narrow down the pool. It's a growing area of interest and has been used quite successfully for about the last decade or so to identify potential drug candidates. So it turns out that one of the databases that they use to identify all these proteins is called the Zinc database, and Zinc stands for Zinc is not commercial. So it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek name, but it's a free database of a whole bunch of different proteins that scientists can access and use it for their computer modeling to identify potential targets, potential drug targets, etc. And so we'll see a number of these articles come up that reference the Zinc database looking at potential targets for COVID-19, and that's the only link to zinc that's present for these particular articles. So again, we'll see a couple of those, and I'll highlight them as we go. But pretty much if you see in silico, structural therapeutics analysis, et cetera, things of that nature, we're going to be talking about the Zinc database, and that's flagging some false results for us in PubMed. So that's the third article. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the fourth article. So this article, as well as the third article, is a computational chemistry article. And so again, they're accessing that Zinc database. They're not actually exploring the utility of zinc, the trace element, in the treatment of COVID-19 disease. So really no useful information there either. So now let's go ahead and move on to our fifth study. So the first article here, or rather the fifth article, it's an interesting article, not really relevant to our discussion, but what it talks about is sort of the reason potentially that the SARS CoV-2 virus has been able to evade host defenses. And what they talk about is this extreme genomic deficiency of CpG sites. And CpG is a cytosine followed by a guanine on in DNA, and you find groups of these cytosine and guanine pairs together on certain portions of DNA. And the reason that's important is there's an antiviral protein called the zinc finger antiviral protein, or ZAP, and ZAP uses CpG as one of the binding sites. And so the theory is that by having low levels of these CpG sites, the SARS-CoV-2 virus essentially is able to evade the activity of the zinc finger antiviral protein. And so that's really what the gist of the article is. Even though it talks about zinc in terms of the zinc finger antiviral protein, it really has nothing to do with zinc supplementation. In fact, they don't even discuss that in the article as a way to boost the activity of the zinc finger antiviral protein, etc. So it's coming up on the list because it includes the word zinc and SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. So nothing there that also tells us anything about the efficacy of zinc in treating COVID-19 disease. So now let's go ahead and talk about the sixth study. So this is another interesting study, a hypothesis-based, I shouldn't use the word study, it's actually a letter to the editor. So the authors here propose that tetracycline may be beneficial in the treatment of COVID-19 disease. And the reason they say that is that they say that coronaviruses are known to rely on a protein called matrix metalloproteins for cell invasion, cell entry, cell adhesion, replication, etc. It turns out that zinc, the trace element, is often an important component of these matrix metalloproteins. So then they go on to say that tetracycline is a drug that we know binds to, covalent, to cations, right? Elements that are positively charged, like zinc, iron, calcium. That's why you're not supposed to take these with those items, calcium supplements, multivitamins, etc., that contain those. That's why you're not supposed to take them with tetracyclines at the same time. So what they're suggesting is that because these drugs, tetracyclines, etc., have a strong ability to chelate or bind to ions like zinc, they actually decrease the availability of zinc in these matrix metalloproteins, and therefore they may be efficacious in treating COVID-19 disease. So they're hypothesizing that tetracyclines may be beneficial in COVID-19 disease. It's a hypothesis only. There's no data to support that whatsoever. And in fact, when we talk about the matrix metalloproteins, there's really very little information about the role of matrix metalloproteins in the function, replication, etc., of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the COVID-19 virus. So that's definitely an extrapolation to go from coronaviruses in general to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And then it's a further extrapolation to say that based on matrix metalloproteins and the fact that they include zinc, and the fact that tetracyclines can bind zinc, we think that tetracyclines then could be an effective treatment against COVID-19. So again, it's another hypothesis where you've got extrapolation built on extrapolation built on extrapolation generating a hypothesis. Now, they may very well be correct, but without testing, we don't really have any information there. So again, the zinc is coming up because of zinc's role in matrix metalloproteins and the fact that tetracyclines can bind to zinc. But in this instance, it really doesn't tell us a whole lot about the utility of zinc in treating COVID-19 disease. So now let's go ahead and move on to our seventh study. And our seventh study is yet another in silico look at different treatments for COVID-19. And so again, they're using the Zinc database. The Zinc is not commercial Zinc database. So nothing there. So what's the bottom line? All right, well, now that we've examined the literature, the available data, such as it is for zinc in COVID-19, let's talk about the bottom line. Now, the bottom line right now is that there's no data, either in vitro, so we don't even have cell models at this point, or in vivo, that suggests that zinc inhibits the COVID-19 virus's ability to replicate, that it prevents viral infection, or in other words, it prevents the virus from being able to enter the cells. We have no data that zinc alleviates clinical symptoms of COVID-19 or that it alters the disease course of COVID-19, again, at the present time. So it may very well do some of these things, but because it hasn't been studied, we aren't able to make any conclusions about it whatsoever. You'll note in the available literature, there's not even a case report of zinc being used in COVID-19 disease. And so, that's interesting. I don't know what it tells us. There's a lot of potential reasons for that. It could be that people have tried it and they didn't see any results, so they didn't bother to publish anything. It could be that it's so early on in this disease that people were looking for other things and only started thinking about zinc as they were thinking back to other experiences, like cold, for example, and the potential efficacy of zinc in limiting some cold symptoms. So they decided to start trying that, and the data just hasn't matured enough, and it could be that in a week's time we'll see a bunch of case reports with zinc. It could be that people are starting randomized clinical trials to look at the efficacy of zinc in COVID-19 disease. But as of right now, none of that seems to be going on. So we really don't have any way of answering this question. And I do know that this is one of the most common questions that certainly we've been getting at APHA, and we think it's one of the most common questions that you as pharmacists on the front lines are getting as well. So we hope that this has been helpful to you in terms of answering that question. The bottom line is we really don't know, and the other piece of the bottom line, which is it's becoming a theme here with COVID-19, is that more data are needed for us to be able to really answer this question. And so it's impossible for us to give good advice at the present time. So with that will wrap up today's 15 on COVID-19 episode. We hope you will join us on Friday, May 1st for our next topic, which is probably our second most requested topic, and that's the role of vitamin C in COVID-19. So we'll do something similar. We'll take a look at the available literature, see what there is to learn from that, and come to a bottom line conclusion. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you on Friday. So as we hope you saw over the last couple of weeks, and certainly today's episode is a good example of this, we are definitely looking for the questions that you're getting on the front line so that we can look into that information, see what's out there, and help you answer those questions. So if you do have a question, please email it to covided@aphanet.org. A huge thank you, as always, to those of you who have already submitted questions and suggestions. Please keep them coming. We will continue to answer as many questions as we can through the COVID-19 series. We hope you've been enjoying it. We're certainly enjoying producing it for you, and we hope again to see you on Friday.